All right, so now we've discussed these kind of two additional categories of aggregate expenditure. So we had aggregate expenditure equals C plus I plus G plus NX. We've made assumptions about the functional form last week of these two, and just this week in terms of this module, these latter two. So remember, C equals lowercase a plus b times yd. A is that autonomous consumption, B is that marginal propensity to consume, and yd is that disposable income, so like after-tax income. Talked about factors that influence different aspects of that last week. We modeled investment as just some constant, which is being pushed around by things like business confidence and interest rates. We've introduced this week government purchases, which we're just holding as kind of a constant now. And what the government's doing is they can lower it or raise it. And we're going to talk about that as fiscal policy, or that's one possible fiscal policy. And we've made a functional form assumptions about exports. So NX equals autonomous exports minus imports. And we have that induced part of imports. And finally, we'll just write it out, but yd equals y minus t. Or remember, the tax revenue is just equal to this net tax rate times y. All right, so lots of equations, but we're going to do it just like we did last week. We're going to plug in all of these functional forms into our AE function. So plug in functional forms into our AE. And so now we get AE equals A plus B times YD, and we're going to have to replace YD in a second. This is our consumption function. Plus I0 plus G0 plus X0 minus M times Y. Or again, this is just desired investment, desired government purchases, and this is our net export function. So we're just plugging all these things in. Now we need to say that YD equals Y minus T, which means YD equals Y minus T times Y, just plugging in that functional form. We could collect the like terms here. And this is what our disposable income looks like. So we can just plug that right back in. So now we have AE, and I'll rewrite this, hopefully it's fitting in the screen, equals A plus B times 1 minus T times Y, just plugging in this right here into that YD, plus I0 plus G0 plus X0 minus M times Y. All right, so hopefully we can see that on the screen. I'm going to quickly erase this. Looks like my writing's getting smaller as I'm trying to fit things in. I'm going to quickly erase this and move this back to the top, and then we'll simplify it just like we did last week. There's just a few more terms, but it's the same idea as we did last module. All right, so I'm going to rewrite that last line. Hopefully it looks the same. Remember, it's A plus B times 1 minus T times Y plus I0 plus G0 plus X0 minus M times Y. So this is kind of where we got to on that last board, so to speak. All right, so we plugged in all of our functional forms. Now we're going to collect terms multiplied by Y. So remember, this is induced expenditure and not multiplied. Multiplied by Y. And remember, this was autonomous. If it's not, that's what we call autonomous aggregate expenditure. All right, so that's all we're going to do here, so AE equals, so this doesn't rely on Y, this doesn't rely on Y, this doesn't rely on Y, and that doesn't rely on Y. So A plus I0 plus G0 plus X0. This is that autonomous aggregate expenditure. Then we're going to collect everything that is multiplied by Y. So this term here, so B minus B times 1 minus T, and then we have this M over here, and we're subtracting this M, so minus M. And those are all multiplied by Y. Remember, this is that induced aggregate expenditure. And now we're going to do exactly like we did last week. Well, we're going to kind of redefine the autonomous part as well as this slope. So just like last time, it seemed kind of silly last week, but notice we have more terms now, so maybe it makes a little bit more sense now. So if we define A, capital A equals A plus I0 plus G0 plus X0, and we're going to define Z, that marginal propensity to spend, the slope of our AE function, as this. This is the marginal propensity to spend. It's like the slope of our AE. Then we can rewrite our AE function, just like we did last week, A plus Z times Y. Just, what that Z stands for is just a little bit more complicated. There's just a couple more terms. What this Z stands for is just a bit more complicated this week. We have this taxes that are influencing, that are multiplied by that marginal propensity to consume, and we're subtracting M, that marginal propensity to import as well. But now this looks the same, so let me quickly erase this board and we can draw it out and talk about this AE function, and then we're going to solve for equilibrium just like we did last week. Alright, so we've rewritten our AE function to just look like last week, so capital A plus Z times Y. So if we put AE on our y-axis just like last week and Y on our x, the intercept is capital A. So capital A equals little a plus I0 plus G0 plus X0. This is our AE function. And the slope is Z, where Z equals B times 1 minus T minus M. All right, and so changes in capital A, so factors that are influencing anything part of autonomous expenditure. So things like wealth are going to affect little a. So if wealth goes up, little a goes up, which is capital A goes up, changes the intercept. Or changes in government purchases are going to shift the intercept around. Where changes in anything with Z is going to change the slope of this AE function. Right? If the tax rate goes up, we're subtracting T, so Z is going to get smaller, so this AE function is going to get flatter. If the tax rate goes down, then this is going to get closer to 0, which means Z gets larger, and we're going to get a steeper AE function. So think about all those factors we learned about that are going to change different aspects of capital A or Z. And when we talk about equilibrium, those are going to start to affect equilibrium because they're influencing this AE function. So one thing to notice is that compared to last week, this Z is smaller. Because, we're multiplying by something less than 1. If last week was just B, remember it was kind of silly, we said define Z equals B. Now we're multiplying B by something less than 1, so this first term is going to be smaller, and we're subtracting something less than 1 as well. So Z is going to be smaller this week than last. The marginal propensity to spend is smaller in this more complicated economy because of taxes and imports. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Let's quickly erase this. We'll talk about equilibrium both graphically as well as algebraically. And then we can talk about changes in equilibrium through fiscal policy and things like that.